Hello,
Hi.
and welcome to another episode of the Phoenix Wisdom Podcast. I'm your host, Janet Sandberg, and today I am joined by Andy Campbell, who has a really interesting perspective, a little bit different than our usual guests, because he has his own story, but also the story of his son and his wife to share with us. So lots of different experiences with suicidal ideation. Andy, welcome. I am really looking forward to hearing your story and the stories of the people you love and how suicidal ideation has affected you and your family. So thanks for being here.
Thank you. I'm Andy Campbell. I guess I would say I am a person who has been confronted with too many of these situations and opportunities. My youngest child, Heston, told us at 9 years of age that he had decided that he was going to kill himself, that seemed the logical thing to do. And we talked to him and worked with him. We were open about it. We didn't shy away from it. We used all the resources that we could, general physicians, psychiatrists, therapists, thinking that along the way he would, find reasons. We thought we had shared every reason that we could come up with to not commit suicide. But for some folks who are highly intelligent and rely on that intelligence to believe that they can forecast the future, he saw that the world was an unjust place and it wasn't going to change. And so for him, the answer ultimately at the age of 18 was to take his own life. And not too long before he did that, maybe 3 years before he did that, I'd been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer.
Wow.
Happy to be here almost 7 years later with no visible sign of disease.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it actually is. I'm kind of in the 1/1000th of 1%, maybe.
Yeah.
There are people who have made it this long, but there's not many cases of those who the disease is no longer visible on the scans. So you're never in remission with pancreatic cancer. They don't have enough people who live long enough to determine if remission takes place. And I remain in a cancer trial to this day, but I'm kind of studied, I think. I think that's why I'm still in the cancer trial. I still get the medication that I've been on for a number of years, but I think they do kind of study you in that.
Yeah.
To determine why you're still here. But, early on in that, it was difficult for everyone, my children, my wife. And frankly, I was probably worth more dead than alive. And, so at least in my mind, you start thinking life insurance and, how everything would work out. I'm going to die anyway, probably from this. Why postpone it? Why not just take care of it? And, so my ideation was, hope from a point of hopelessness at that point, but also from a point of thinking maybe this would be better for my family.
Yeah.
Right. And I think a lot of people think that along the way for different reasons. They think maybe this would be better for everyone involved.
Mm-hmm.
What I would share with people that are contemplating suicide is that it is not better for everyone involved. My son believed that when he died, his pain would go with him. People would be better off. I have come to be convinced that the pain does not go with the person who takes their life. It stays and it's amplified and it spreads and it touches everyone that loves them and everyone who has ever known them. And it's like a tear in the fabric of the universe. I think for them in particular and for everyone that's close to them, the better thing to do is to stay and deal with the pain. Remove the pain, eliminate the pain as best you can, because that's when the pain goes away, when you can deal with the pain and eliminate the pain without eliminating yourself. Because when you kill yourself, that pain doesn't actually go with you. And the people who have taken it, my son doesn't know that. He didn't realize that the pain stayed.
Yeah.
But it does. And afterwards, my wife was very close to my son, And she had stayed home, raised our children. He was the last one, so she had a lot of time to spend with him. And she was just unbelievably, as the youngest child that a mother might be. And when he took his life, it was very difficult for her not to follow suit. It really got to the place where it's just not worth it. I don't want to live with the pain. Kind of the same thing. I don't want to live with the pain.
Yeah. Yeah. I can't even imagine.
I called her one day.
Overwhelmingly painful that would be as a parent.
I think it's worse for them. It's bad for the father. I think it's even more so for the mother. you carried the child, you birthed the child, you fed the child, there's just, and she just got to the point. I called her one day and I said, I don't have a good feeling about where things are. And I could tell I didn't know where she was exactly. I didn't know what was going through her mind, but I knew she was contemplating. And I convinced her to call our family physician. She did. And because he had been Heston's physician and was really impacted by Heston's suicide because he had just seen him about 10 days before. And he kept a very close tab on Heston. He had fairly regular appointments with him, and he was always made himself available to him via text message or phone if he ever needed him. And we had a fantastic relationship with him, still do.
Yeah.
But my wife called him, and he told her, he said, I've lost one, I'm not losing another one. So you need to come see me now. And she did. And he talked to her and he explained to her where she was. And he said, we're going to try some medication because we've got to get some separation here between you and those thoughts. And it worked. It worked. She was able to pull back. But she told me that she had determined that day that she was going to, the pain was just too much. The pain was too much. And again, that's kind of where I got to. And I've told her, if you had followed through, again, the pain would have just been, it would have just grown. It would have stayed here, And And the risk is it's generational, that pain can last generations. So that's kind of my story,
I'm curious about, you said your son's name was Heston?
Yes. I still say his name on purpose. I still,
Of course.
I still say I have 4 children.
Yeah.
If people say I meet you, I have 4.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll always have 4.
Yeah. At 9 years old, how did he even know what suicide was? Or he didn't? Know. He just knew that he didn't want to be here.
He just said that he had decided that he didn't want to be here, that he was going to kill himself. And we talked to him. It's like he wasn't even on the internet at that point. So he didn't have outside contact with some group or some social media thing. Right. So it wasn't like, we never considered it like a social contagion. He just really decided that he decided that he was going to leave. We said, we never really explained it. He just said it was his idea. He decided he didn't want to be here. He did not want to be here. And
couldn't ever shake the feeling.
I think, what he told me was that he was not afraid of death. He was not afraid of death. He had looked at going into the military, and I said, well, what makes you kind of look in that direction? And he said, and he wanted to go into special forces specifically so that he could die in battle. That was his idea. So like much of kind of the way he talked and looked, the way he looked at life was about death is inevitable.
Right.
And so now it's going to be whether I choose how I die. And if you looked at him, he had none of the like the way people might stereotype the look. He was just normal. I would go to the Home Depot and a lady at the front would see him with me and she would call me to the side and she goes, your son came up here the other day to return something. I just want you to know he is the most courteous young man that I have met in this store. Like you would never guess if you talked to him, if you didn't know him. Well, if you weren't, as close as we were, you would not guess.
Right.
And I thought many times we thought he'd actually turned a corner, but ultimately he made his decision.
Yeah.
And so now we live with that.
Yeah. How long has it been?
I found him June 7th, 2020. So that would be 4 years.
4 years?
We're coming up on 4 years. Yeah. The first year is a blur.
Sure. Yeah.
Second year, I think, is most painful. And then you work to get through that. And then you realize there's way too much of it. You join a Facebook group for parental survivors of suicide and the group is just way too big. It's unbelievably large and they're getting new requests to join the group from parents daily. I don't know if anyone would change their mind if they understood that the pain was going to stay when they left, but if just one person could grasp that concept and not take their own life, not end it, I think that would be worthwhile.
Absolutely. Yeah. What about your other kids? Have they ever talked about taking their lives, or even, that they understood where he was coming from with his yearning, I guess, to take his life?
I don't think anyone, it devastated his siblings. They were all older than him. And, they were one was local to us. The other two one was in college and one was traveling at the time. And we had to call them and tell them the news. And all of them, at a cerebral level, they all knew, everyone believed that it was very possible that it would happen. So It wasn't, from that perspective, it wasn't a surprise, but it didn't lessen the devastation of the reality of it. Right. And I think that was really one of my greatest fears, like with my wife, were my children going to give up? I don't know what the statistics are. I had heard that, when one person commits suicide, that, there is a greater probability that someone in the immediate family will follow suit. And,
interesting. Yeah.
At least that's what the doctors and therapists told me at the time, because they're like, you have to keep an eye. You have to watch.
Yeah.
And I remember I was we were in a grieving group for parents of children, who had committed suicide. And one of the gentlemen there had lost both his daughters to suicide.
Oh my
One
gosh.
followed and committed suicide the same way as the youngest sister took her life. And then the oldest one followed suit and killed herself the exact same way in front of him.
Oh.
And so I became kind of hyper vigilant at that point. But yeah, I think they all struggled with, I don't know what causes suicidal ideation or to take the act. My wife has described it as walking very close to a tunnel, and that, when you're thinking about it, you're still outside the tunnel.
Mm-hmm.
But once you step inside the tunnel, it has a seductiveness to it that draws you in. And it happened to her. And so she said, I really feel like that's what happened to Heston. He had been on the outside, but that day or a few days before, he had started to move in the tunnel.
Mm-hmm.
And then once he was there, it just drew him in, and he, for whatever reason, gave in, decided he took that final irreversible act. And so, I watched with hypervigilance while going through the treatments for cancer. I watched with hypervigilance for each of them. And there was a lot of pain. I mean, there was just, I thought multiple times the family would just come apart, everybody trying to deal with it in their own way.
Mm-hmm.
But emotions run short and everybody's angry.
Yeah. Yeah.
They may have forgiven him, but they're angry.
Yeah.
And that anger comes out, and it comes out in whatever way it comes out at the moment. And that can be painful to people who are also angry and hurt. And so it's an unbelievably complex, it spreads very much like a cancer. Once the person has committed the act, like I said, that pain, that's where I kind of got the idea the pain doesn't go away, because I saw what was painful become really almost unbearably painful for his family, his friends, people who knew him. The day he killed himself, he'd sent a text message to the guy that he worked for. And the guy said, look, man, nothing's that bad. Why don't you just come on down, stay with me for a couple of days? He lived 10 or 15 miles away. He's like, I got a room. You can just hang out here. And he said he never heard back from him. So he thought everything was fine and that he would be at work. I guess that was I think that was a Saturday. So I guess he thought it was going to be at work on Monday. And when he didn't show up, he called us and we told him what had happened. So it doesn't just stop where you are. Like, he was devastated by that, right? This 18-year-old that he really enjoyed having, he was, like a independent contractor, construction, carpentry stuff. And he took an interest in Heston, and Heston worked with him, and he had a sense of humor, and they communicated well. And he really thought that he could, help Heston in the trades and give him something, to do, and it would help him. And he was just devastated. So again, it doesn't, for anyone thinking about it, it may be true that you relieve yourself of that pain, but that pain does not go away. It is amplified. It would be better for everyone if you stayed and worked to remove the pain while remaining here. Yeah. It's better for you. It's better for everyone who loves you. And it's better for everyone who knows you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's better for the infinity of the universe, because now everything that he may have done, every offspring he may have had, every future generation will never exist. It's just gone. So any contribution he was going to make is gone. So it's almost like it's not just the impact of him going, it's the impact of all that he will never accomplish, all that he could have contributed to society, all that he could have contributed to other people, all that he could have contributed to, because I believe every human life is valuable, and that, you're here for some purpose. You may not know what it is today, but you're here for some purpose. You got to give that a chance to play out. Got to give that a chance to play out, because I don't believe anybody else can replace you.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
We were talking a little bit before we started recording about how incredibly intelligent Hester was, and how, when you're really, really smart, everybody sort of thinks, wow, that's really great. But at the same time, when your IQ is off the charts, like, you feel like you don't fit in, like nobody understands you, like you're sort of the odd man out, or odd person out. And, that plays into a lot of things. And I don't think we really talk about that enough. So much of the help, especially when kids are little, go the kids with learning disabilities, and the gifted ones are like, oh, well, you're great. There are some gifted programs for kids, of course, but it's living life as a gifted kid is a very, very different experience that I don't think there's really enough research into or enough support for those kids. They're kind of just expected to act like normal kids, but they're not.
No. They're not. And in Heston's case, he was one of those people that, and not to say that he wasn't proficient at mathematics, but that was not his gifted area. Almost to his detriment, or maybe to his detriment, he was gifted in language and philosophy and basically thinking. And so he struggled, when you're 9 or 10 or 11 and you're writing your own, perspectives and assessment of Marcus Aurelius's diaries. There's not a lot of other 10 or 11-year-olds that you can communicate with about that. Right? When you're, 15 and you're comparing Nietzsche and the book of Job, there's not a lot of people to talk to about that, right? And so he thought a lot. Thinking too much is not really, I don't think, a good thing. Especially when your thoughts are not positive.
Yes.
And additionally, he'd had a bad experience. He was going to harm himself one time, and we had a couple situations that I told him, if you tell me or you attempt to harm yourself again, I'm going to take you to the medical university. I'm going to commit you, and because I'm not going to allow you to harm yourself. And that was the hardest thing I ever had to do. He did threaten it. My wife had to call the police to hopefully, we didn't know exactly what he was going to do, but he calmed down, and they were going to take him. They're like, we can't leave you here, right? Like, because he told them he was going to harm himself. But in his mind, he calmed down so everything would be fine. And it wasn't fine. So I drove him, and I didn't leave it to someone else. It was the hardest. That took a lot of EMDR to get through. But I think that also, for him, it had almost the opposite effect. He realized that if he said anything and told anyone how he truly felt, that he might end up there again. He never tried to harm himself again. But I think internally, he harmed himself a lot, mentally. And so he would talk to us, but he would always stop short of saying that I'm going to do something today.
Right.
Because he was very concerned about that. So yeah, I think I had not considered it until our family physician said, he's one of the smartest young men I've ever encountered. And I knew to worry about him because of that. And I said, I don't understand. He said, Andy, you don't understand how many, young men and women I see. And when I detect that they are of higher intelligence than average, I put a special focus on exactly where they are mentally. Because I have seen too many that are too smart, put that in quotation marks, but too smart to be here. And so, yeah, I think it does for a lot of the reasons that you described, right? Who in their mind, who can really understand what they're saying?
Mm-hmm.
Who can understand the depth of their pain? Who can understand the depth of their logic? Who can understand how they know what the future holds? Although he did tell me that I would not die from pancreatic cancer, and that part did come true. Yeah, I kept telling him, I said, you can't do something like this. If I go and then you go, there will be no family.
Yeah.
And he said, no, it doesn't matter because you're not going to die from pancreatic cancer. Yeah, he was very direct about it. Matter of fact, it's not going to happen. And they just turn around and walk away. And I was like, I had a conversation with him. I'm like, you don't actually know that. And he said, no, I do. You're not dying from pancreatic cancer, but I don't think I'll make it.
Wow.
And, like I really wish he had been a little less bright than he was.
Yeah.
I mean it sincerely, right? I really do. I wish he got that one right, but he got a lot of other things wrong in his forecast,
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think if you have a child that is, and it's not that it doesn't affect people of all ranges.
Yeah.
But if you have a child that is, another thing that struck me was that there are highly intelligent people that do not score well on tests, and so people think they're not as intelligent as they are. And so they'll be like, well, that's just an average intelligence person. And I tell people, like, are you certain? Because if they have thought through these things, there is an intelligence to that. Like, to them, this seems logical. Maybe we can't wrap our head around it.
Mm-hmm.
But because to me, it's illogical. It's an illogical act, except for the one time where I really thought, and that's the only time that I thought, people would be better off without me here. And I don't know why I didn't pursue it. I can understand. I can understand how he got to that position. I just really wish he had not.
Of course.
Had not done that. Right?
Yeah.
And actually, I think that his heart was big enough that if he could have really seen the future, I think he would not have done it. It wasn't that he didn't care. He cared probably too much.
Mm-hmm.
He was an old, soft soul.
Which makes it really hard to be in the world.
And people, the psychiatrist said, you got to toughen up. And I don't think that was very helpful.
Because that was not in
his, and it was not who he was. He felt everything.
Mm.
And it made him a special person.
Yeah.
He would defend people. He would throw himself in front of defending what he felt like was an unjust situation. And I wish he'd been a little less thoughtful and had stayed a little longer.
Yeah. Well, I am very sorry for your loss and for everything that you and your family have been through. But I am very grateful and appreciative that you joined us today on the podcast and shared your very unique perspective and your life experiences and those of your son and your family. So thank you so much.
I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Remember that you are loved, you are worthy, you are valuable, you are meant for more, and that it really does get better. If you are in crisis, there are numbers that you can call or text to get the help that you need. That information for Canada and the US is in the description below each episode. If you are in immediate crisis, please call 911. We love you, and I hope you'll listen again.